Sarah stood at the illegal auction, a place where your soul got bartered away. She wore a red dress, tight, showing off every curve, but it felt like a scarlet letter, not sexy at all. Her eyes darted around the room, a desperate scan of the scene. Men in slick suits, Wall Street types, were sizing up the women like they were prize cattle. For Sarah, this was rock bottom, the absolute dregs. But Ethan, her son, was gravely ill. He needed treatment, the kind you only read about, the kind that cost more than a lifetime of waitressing tips. She'd already pawned everything, every last piece of jewelry, the TV, even her grandmother's locket. Now, only she was left to sell. The weight of her choices, the bad turns, the dead ends, it was crushing. But then she pictured Ethan's pale face, his weak smile, and her resolve hardened like steel. She would do anything for him. Lot number 23, the auctioneer boomed, his smile plastered and fake. Sarah's blood ran cold. Her turn. She sucked in a lungful of air, feeling dizzy, lightheaded. For a split second, she thought about bolting, running out the back door, disappearing into the city night. But Ethan's face flashed before her eyes. Not for me. This is for Ethan. She straightened her shoulders, took another shaky breath, and walked towards the stage. As she stepped into the harsh spotlight, the auctioneer launched into his rehearsed spiel. A true gem, gentlemen, exotic beauty, natural grace. The words felt hollow, like he was describing a painting, not a human being. Then, her gaze locked onto a man in the back row. He sat in shadow, silent, his eyes intense, like they could see right through the glitz and desperation in the room. Richard Sterling. Sarah didn't know his name, but his presence was a force field. He was different from the other wolves in suits. He wasn't leering, wasn't smirking. He just watched her, his expression unreadable, like he was assessing the situation, not the merchandise. The bidding started. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting to keep the panic from showing. The idea of being bought, owned, it was repulsive. But it was Ethan's only shot. The numbers climbed quickly, a tense back and forth between a couple of guys in the front row. Each bid was a hammer blow to her heart. Each raise made her stomach clench tighter. Then, a voice, deep and firm, cut through the noise. 2 million. Silence. The whole room went dead quiet. Every head swiveled to the back. Richard Sterling. He stood slowly, like a king rising from his throne, exuding power, a silent challenge in his gaze. Anyone else? The auctioneer asked, his voice suddenly shaky, surprised. A few seconds of stunned silence hung in the air. Then, the auctioneer's fake smile snapped back into place. Sold to Mr. Sterling. To Mr. Sarah's knees buckled, but she managed to stay upright as she stepped down from the stage, her legs feeling like jelly. Her eyes met Richard's for a fleeting moment. Something in his gaze stopped her cold. It wasn't lust, wasn't arrogance, like the others. It was something else. Determination, resolution. Richard walked towards her, stopping just a few feet away. He was tall, imposing, with sharp features and an air of command that radiated off him like heat. Without a word, he extended his hand, offering to help her. Sarah hesitated, studying his face, wary. Then, she placed her trembling hand in his. We need to talk, he said, his voice firm but controlled, not unkind. Sarah didn't know what to expect, but she followed Richard to a private room. Inside, he closed the door, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He turned to face her, crossing his arms, his gaze intense. Do you realize what you've just done? His voice was heavy, serious. Sarah took a shaky breath. I didn't have a choice. Richard studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, I'm not here for amusement, Sarah. I didn't participate in that auction to take advantage of anyone. Sarah frowned, confused. Then why? Richard leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto hers. Because if it weren't me, someone with far worse intentions would have done the same. I want to help you and your son. Sarah felt his words wash over her, a dizzying mix of relief and disbelief. Why? Why would someone like you help someone like me? Richard gave a faint smile, a sad, almost weary expression. Let's just say I understand the kind of desperation that drives someone to do what you did today. Sarah still wasn't sure if she could trust him, but Richard's gaze, so direct, so seemingly sincere, made her want to believe him. Just for a moment, he continued, I'll take care of your son's treatment, the best doctors in the city, but I need you to trust me and agree to a few conditions. She hesitated, her heart pounding. What kind of conditions? You and Ethan will stay at my place for a while. You won't be required to do anything except take care of your son. Maybe help my niece with some schoolwork. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. That's it? That's all? That's it, he confirmed. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah. I just want to make sure you and Ethan are safe." As surreal as it all sounded, something in Richard's voice, the quiet intensity, the direct gaze, made her believe he was telling the truth. Tears welled up in her eyes. She finally nodded. "All right, I accept." Richard straightened up, his expression resolute. "Good. Tomorrow we start a new chapter." Sarah knew her life had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn, but she had no idea that the secrets the future held would turn everything she thought she knew upside down. Sarah stared out the window of the black car, the city lights blurring into streaks of color and shadow. The silence inside the car was thick, oppressive. Up front, the driver was a statue, eyes fixed on the road. Beside her, Richard sat relaxed, his gaze distant, like he was already miles away planning his next move. The night air was cool, but the tension between them felt like a furnace. Sarah couldn't decide if she felt relieved or terrified. Richard's promise sounded sincere, but she knew nothing in life came free, especially not from a man like him. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice cracking the heavy silence. "To my penthouse," Richard replied, not looking at her. "From now on, you and Ethan will be under my care." Sarah frowned, her unease growing. "Why are you doing this? What's the real reason?" Richard sighed, rubbing his chin, like he'd been expecting the question all along. "I've already told you. I couldn't just stand by while someone with bad intentions bought you in that place. If you can't trust me yet, I understand. But over time, I hope you will." Sarah crossed her arms, hugging herself tight, like trying to build a shield. "You seem so sure of yourself. But how can I trust someone I've known for only a few hours?" This time, Richard turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I don't expect your trust right now, Sarah. I know that takes time. But for now, I want you to focus on what really matters. Ethan." The mention of her son softened Sarah's defenses. She looked down at the plush carpet, unable to meet his gaze any longer. He was right. Ethan was all that mattered. When they pulled up to a gleaming skyscraper, a shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The place was opulent, intimidating. The car glided into an underground garage, and they took a private elevator that shot them upwards, dizzyingly fast. The doors opened directly into a massive, breathtaking penthouse apartment. Walls of glass framed the glittering city skyline. For Sarah, who was used to cramped walk-ups and greasy spoon diners, it was like stepping onto another planet. As she stepped out of the elevator, she clutched her worn duffel bag tighter, as if afraid of losing the last piece of her old life. Richard walked ahead, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. Sarah followed, trying to take it all in. Inside, the penthouse was even more extravagant than she could have imagined. Designer furniture, abstract art that probably cost more than her entire life savings, and a chandelier that looked like it was made of diamonds. Sarah felt completely out of place, a stray cat in a palace. "This will be your home for a while," Richard said, stopping in the middle of the vast living room. He gestured towards a woman approaching them. "Sarah, this is Maria. She'll make sure you and Ethan have everything you need." Maria was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile that was a welcome contrast to the overwhelming luxury. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am," she said with a warm nod. "Please, call me Sarah," she replied, feeling a flicker of warmth from the genuine greeting. Richard nodded at Maria as if handing over responsibility. "I'll leave you to get settled. Tomorrow we'll discuss next steps." Before Sarah could respond, he turned and disappeared down a hallway, leaving her feeling both relieved and strangely abandoned. "Come with me, dear," Maria said, breaking the silence. "I'll show you your suite and your son's room." Sarah followed Maria through the penthouse's long, hushed hallways. Every room was more lavish than the last. Finally, they stopped at a door, and Maria opened it carefully, revealing a spacious, serene bedroom decorated in soft grays and creams, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. A king-sized bed dominated the room, and there was a walk-in closet already stocked with designer clothes, and a sleek desk adorned with fresh orchids. "This is your suite," Maria said. "Your son's room is just next door. The doctor will be here in the morning to examine him. If you need anything at all, just ask." Sarah gave Maria a faint smile of gratitude and stepped into the suite, feeling the weight of the day finally crashing down on her. She sank onto the edge of the bed, gazing around the room. The contrast between this opulent sanctuary and the grinding poverty she'd just escaped was almost too much to comprehend. Later, after checking on Ethan in his adjoining room, Sarah lay down in the enormous bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was racing, crowded with questions. Who was Richard Sterling, really? Why was he doing this? And most importantly, what was the price of his help? The next morning, a soft knock on the door woke her. It was Maria, carrying a breakfast tray piled high with pastries, fresh fruit, and steaming coffee. "The doctor has arrived and is ready to examine Ethan," she informed her gently. Sarah quickly dressed and led Ethan to a makeshift consultation room that had been set up in a smaller lounge area. Richard was already there talking to the doctor. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, as composed and unreadable as he had been the night before. "Dr. Evans is one of the best pediatric specialists in the city," Richard said, turning to Sarah. "He'll make sure Ethan gets the best possible care." Sarah couldn't help but feel a tug in her heart as she watched Richard interact with the doctor. Beneath the polished surface, the cool demeanor, there seemed to be a genuine concern. While Dr. Evans examined Ethan, Sarah noticed Richard watching her discreetly. He seemed to be studying her, trying to decipher something about her. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet. "Sarah, I know this is all a lot to take in, but I want you to know that my offer comes without any hidden motives." She looked at him, searching his eyes, trying to gauge the truth in his words. "Then why are you doing this? I still don't understand." Richard hesitated, as if choosing his words with care. "Let's just say, I've seen people I cared about destroyed by bad choices, by desperation. I don't want that to happen to you or Ethan." Sarah felt a chill run through her. Richard's words were sincere, but there was something in his tone, a weight, a shadow of pain that she couldn't quite grasp. She decided not to push him, at least not yet. Instead, she focused on Ethan, who was actually smiling as Dr. Evans spoke to him in a friendly, reassuring tone. Maybe, just maybe, this really could be the start of a new life. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse's massive windows, bathing everything in a soft, golden light that was at odds with the heavy feeling still in Sarah's chest. That morning, she watched Ethan play in a sun-drenched conservatory that felt like a secret garden in the sky. Exotic flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, their fragrance sweet and intoxicating. Soft grass, unbelievably real, covered the floor. Ethan's laughter, a sound Sarah hadn't heard freely in weeks, made her lips curve into a hesitant smile. Still, she couldn't fully relax. It all felt too fragile, too perfect to be true. "Ethan looks happy," a voice said behind her, breaking her reverie. Sarah turned to see Richard standing on a small balcony overlooking the conservatory. He was dressed casually in jeans and a white shirt, which made him seem less imposing, almost approachable, though his gaze still held that intensity, that sense of seeing more than she showed. "Yes, he is," Sarah replied, trying to mask the lingering distrust in her voice. "He's never had a space like this to play in before." Richard stepped down from the balcony and walked over to her, stopping beside her. "Children deserve a place where they can feel free. Ethan is safe here." Sarah crossed her arms, as if still trying to shield herself. "I know you've said that before, but I still don't understand why you're doing all this, Richard. It feels like you're carrying something you're trying to make up for." Richard was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on Ethan as the boy chased a brightly colored butterfly. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am trying to make up for something, but it's not just that. Ethan, he reminds me that there's still innocence in the world, something I'd forgotten." Sarah was surprised by his honesty. There was a flicker of something in Richard's eyes, a hint of deep-seated pain, something he wasn't ready to fully reveal. Before she could ask more, a child's voice echoed behind them. "Uncle Richard!" Sarah turned to see a little girl running towards them. She looked about 6 years old, with dark curls and bright, curious eyes. She hesitated when she noticed Sarah's presence, but her face lit up when she spotted Ethan. "Who's he?" she asked, pointing at Ethan with open curiosity. "Lily, this is Ethan," Richard said, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. "Ethan, this is my niece, Lily." Lily approached Ethan timidly, but a smile soon bloomed on her face. "Do you want to play with me?" she asked, extending her hand to Ethan. He looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. In seconds, the two children were chasing each other through the conservatory, their laughter echoing through the glass dome. Sarah watched them, a warmth spreading through her chest, but her curiosity about Lily deepened. "She seems very quiet for a child," Sarah observed, turning back to Richard. Richard nodded, his expression shifting to something more somber. "Lily lost her parents 2 years ago. Car accident. Since then, I've been trying to take care of her, but she still carries a lot of sadness." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm so sorry. That must be hard for her. And for you, too." "It is," Richard replied, not offering more details. "But right now, she seems happy, at least for a little while." Sarah didn't want to pry, but the way Richard spoke about Lily, the protective tenderness in his voice, intrigued her. There was more to his story than he was letting on, something that seemed to hurt him deeply. Later, while Ethan and Lily played under Maria's watchful eye, Richard led Sarah to a small, elegant office tucked away at the end of a hallway. The room was lined with bookshelves overflowing with leather-bound volumes, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the space. Richard sat behind the desk and gestured for Sarah to take the chair in front of him. "We need to talk about next steps," he began, his tone businesslike, but not unkind. "Ethan will receive the best medical care, of course, but there are other matters we need to consider." Sarah frowned, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. "What kind of matters?" "Education, for one. I'd like to enroll Ethan in a top private school as soon as he's healthy enough. He deserves a chance to grow up in a better environment." Sarah felt a confusing mix of gratitude and apprehension. "I appreciate that, Richard, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. He's already been through so much. Taking him away from everything that's familiar..." Richard raised a hand gently, interrupting her. "I understand. We won't do anything without your approval, Sarah, but I want you to know that every opportunity will be available to him." Sarah didn't know what to say. From the moment she'd met Richard, he'd projected a blend of control and kindness that left her unsettled. It was hard to tell where genuine sincerity ended and calculated pragmatism began. Before she could respond, Richard stood and walked to one of the bookshelves. He pulled out an old book with a worn leather cover and placed it on the desk between them. "This belonged to my sister," he said, his voice suddenly heavy with nostalgia. "She used to read it to Lily every night before bed. After she passed," Lily stopped smiling, but it seems Ethan managed to change that, even if just for a moment. Sarah ran her hand over the book's cover, feeling the weight of unspoken emotions it carried. "Richard, I'm so sorry about what happened to your sister. It must be hard raising Lily on your own." He nodded, crossing his arms, his gaze distant. "It's difficult, but life doesn't wait for us to be ready to handle these things. We just have to keep moving forward." Sarah looked at him, realizing that beneath his outward strength, Richard was a man deeply scarred by loss, a man carrying his own burdens. Maybe Lily and Ethan can help each other," she said softly. "They seem to be getting along really well." Richard smiled, a rare, fleeting gesture that transformed his face. "Maybe they can. Kids, they have an incredible ability to connect, to heal." Sarah picked up the book, holding it a little tighter. For the first time since arriving at the penthouse, she felt a flicker of real hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this place could become more than a temporary refuge. Maybe it was the beginning of something more, something greater. The penthouse was hushed, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside and the rustling of leaves in the conservatory garden. Sarah wandered through the long hallways after putting Ethan to bed. The boy was calmer than he'd been in months, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a fragile sense of peace. Yet, her mind was still restless, filled with doubts and unanswered questions about Richard, about everything she'd discovered since arriving in this gilded cage. Without consciously deciding, her steps led her to the library. The room was immense, a cathedral of books, row upon row stretching to the high ceiling, holding centuries of stories, of secrets. Sarah felt drawn to the space, as if some invisible force was guiding her. She began browsing the shelves, running her fingers along the spines of the old books, the scent of aged paper and leather filling the air. Then, something on one of the walls caught her eye, a framed photograph. Sarah approached slowly, her breath catching in her throat. She recognized one of the people in the picture, her mother. She blinked, incredulous, thinking she must be imagining things, but there was no mistaking it. The woman in the photo, younger, with a soft smile, was her mother, Renee. She stood next to another woman, a refined young lady with delicate features and a gold crescent moon necklace. Sarah froze, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Why would a photograph of her mother be in Richard's library? And who was the woman with her, the one wearing the distinctive necklace? Before she could process it all, a voice came from behind her, low, laced with tension. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She turned abruptly, startled, to see Richard standing in the doorway, his expression hard to read, somewhere between curiosity and discomfort. I was just exploring," she said hesitantly. "But then, I saw this." She pointed to the photograph, her hand trembling slightly. Richard walked slowly towards her, his eyes fixed on the image. When he stopped beside Sarah, his expression shifted subtly, as though something about the photo unsettled him deeply. Who are these women in this picture? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Richard hesitated for a split second, then responded with apparent calm. The young woman on the right, that's my sister, Sophie. He gestured towards the woman wearing the crescent moon necklace. The other, I don't know, she must have been someone who worked here. Sarah felt her chest tighten. He didn't know? How was that possible? That woman, that's my mother, she said, her voice barely a whisper, waiting for his reaction. Richard raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Your mother? Are you sure? Yes, Sarah insisted, holding his gaze. I would recognize my mother anywhere. Richard remained silent, his eyes shifting back to the photograph. He seemed to be analyzing the image more closely, his rigid posture betraying the discomfort he was trying to hide. Unfortunately, I don't remember her, he finally said, his tone carefully measured. And I'm not sure your mother ever worked here. Sarah didn't know what to think. Something about Richard's demeanor felt off, deliberately evasive. Was he lying? And if he was, why? Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mother's face in the photograph kept flashing in her mind, along with Richard's carefully chosen words. Something didn't add up. He clearly knew more than he was letting on. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to do some investigating of her own. She knew Maria, the housekeeper, had worked at the penthouse for years and might have answers. The next morning, Sarah found Maria in the kitchen, overseeing the breakfast preparations. Maria, she began, trying to sound casual. Can I ask you something? Of course, dear. What do you need to know? Maria replied with a warm smile. My mother, Renee, I think she worked here in the past. Do you remember her? Maria looked surprised by the question and paused for a moment thinking. Renee, oh yes, I remember her. She worked here for many years, back when Sophie was alive. She was such a sweet and hardworking woman. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Do you know what she did here? She was one of Sophie's caregivers, Maria explained. They were very close, almost like sisters, I think. Sophie trusted her more than anyone else. Maria's words confirmed Sarah's growing suspicions. Her mother hadn't just known Sophie. They were close friends. But this revelation raised even more questions. Why had her mother never mentioned it? And why had Richard lied about knowing her? Later, while Richard was away at a business meeting, Sarah returned to the library. This time, she was determined to find answers. She began searching through the bookshelves, focusing on the area near where she'd found the photograph. After several minutes of careful searching, she found a small notebook tucked away behind a row of books. It had a worn leather cover and the initials SS embossed on the front. As she opened the notebook, Sarah realized it was a journal. The pages were filled with Sophie's elegant, flowing handwriting. As she read, Sarah found several mentions of her mother. Renee is the only person I can truly trust, one entry read. She always knows what to say to calm me down. I don't know what I would do without her. Another passage made her heart stop. Today, Renee and I talked about the future. She said she sometimes feels like she needs to leave, to move on. But I don't want her to go. She's like a sister to me. Sarah swallowed hard. This confirmed that something significant had happened between her mother and Richard's family, something that made Renee consider leaving. The question was, what? That afternoon, while Ethan and Lily played in the conservatory, Sarah decided to seek out Maria again. The housekeeper seemed like the most reliable source of information, and Sarah knew she needed to dig deeper. Maria was in the main hall, dusting an antique table, when she saw Sarah approaching. She gave her a warm smile. Is something wrong, dear? Maria, Sarah began hesitantly, do you know why my mother stopped working here? What happened to make her leave? Maria looked surprised by the question and paused, thinking for a moment. Well, it was all very complicated. I remember Renee being very close to Sophie, as you already know. They were inseparable. But one day, Richard's father decided it was better for Renee to leave. Sarah frowned, her unease growing. Why? What did he have against my mother? Maria sighed. Mr. Sterling, Richard's father, was a very strict man, very controlling. He didn't think Sophie forming such a close bond with someone outside the family, especially someone who worked for them, was appropriate. He believed Renee was interfering too much in Sophie's life. Sarah stood silent, processing the information. But did he fire her, or was there more to it? I don't know all the details, Maria admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. But I remember Renee left very suddenly. And Sophie was devastated. After that, Sophie was never the same. Maria's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Sarah felt a knot of sadness and anger tighten in her stomach. Her mother had never mentioned any of this, but it was clear that the incident had left deep scars on both Renee and Sophie. Later that evening, Richard returned from his meeting. He looked tired, but Sarah knew it was the right time to confront him again. She found him in his office, as usual, reviewing documents. When he saw Sarah enter, he looked up, a question in his eyes. "You've been very inquisitive lately," he remarked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. But Sarah wasn't in the mood for small talk. "Richard, I need to know the truth about my mother," she said directly, her voice firm. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his gaze steady. "I've already told you what I know, Sarah. Your mother worked here, but I don't have many details." "That's not true," Sarah shot back, feeling her frustration rise. "You knew my mother was important to Sophie. You knew she was sent away on purpose." Richard was silent for a moment, his expression growing more serious. Finally, he sighed. "You're right. I knew Renee was important to Sophie. But what you need to understand is that my father, he was a controlling man. He believed he was protecting Sophie by making your mother leave." "Protecting her from what?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Was my mother a threat?" Richard shook his head slowly. "No, but my father, he was afraid that Sophie would be influenced by Renee to make rebellious decisions. He always wanted to maintain absolute control over us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she forced them back. "So my mother was fired because your father thought she was giving your sister too much freedom?" Richard nodded slowly. "That's essentially what happened." "But Richard," Sarah asked, staring directly at him, "what did you do?" Richard averted his gaze, a shadow of shame crossing his face. I was young at the time. I didn't know how to stand up to my father. I did what he told me, like I always had." Sarah felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. She understood that Richard had also been a victim of his father's oppressive control, but she couldn't help but wonder how different things might have been if he had stood up for her mother, for Sophie. That night, Sarah returned to the library, drawn back to Sophie's diary. There was one entry she hadn't read yet, near the end of the notebook, and her hands trembled as she turned the page. "Today was the worst day of my life. My father sent Renee away. I begged him. I cried, but he wouldn't budge. He said it was for my own good, but he doesn't understand. Renee was the only person who made me feel free. Now, I feel alone again. I don't know how I'll cope." Sarah closed the diary, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had been a light in Sophie's life, a source of joy and freedom, but that light had been extinguished by Richard's father's tyrannical control. And now, decades later, that story was still casting long shadows over Sarah and Ethan's lives. But there was more. Sarah felt it in her bones. She still didn't know the full truth. There was a missing piece to this puzzle, something that tied her mother to the Sterling family even more deeply, and she was determined to find it, no matter what it took. Sarah was resolute. From the moment she discovered her mother, Renee, had worked in Richard's penthouse for years, and that her presence there was more than just a coincidence, her mind hadn't rested. There was a mystery buried in this opulent apartment, a secret waiting to be unearthed. Sarah knew that to protect Ethan, and to understand her own tangled connection to Richard's family, she needed to uncover the whole truth. After dinner with Richard, Sarah returned to the library, drawn back to Sophie's journal, her main clue. She needed to examine every detail of the notebook, convinced it held critical answers about what had happened between her mother and Richard's sister. She sat at the large mahogany desk, carefully opening the worn journal. Sophie's words seemed to leap off the pages as Sarah read. The young woman's loneliness, her sense of being trapped, constrained by her family's rigid expectations, became palpable. Renee, in Sophie's words, was a lifeline, a source of comfort in a stifling world. "Renee is the only person who truly understands me," one entry read. "She listens to me, gives me advice, and never judges me. Unlike my father, or even Richard, it's as if she's my real sister." But the further Sarah read, the darker Sophie's words became. One passage made her stop, her heart pounding in her chest. "Today, my father said that Renee needs to leave. He thinks her presence is a bad influence. He doesn't understand how important she is to me. I don't know what I'll do if she goes." Sarah swallowed hard. This confirmed that something serious had transpired between her mother and Richard's father, something that led to Renee's abrupt dismissal. But why was Mr. Sterling so threatened by her mother's presence? That afternoon, while Ethan and Lily played in the conservatory garden, Sarah decided to seek out Maria again. The housekeeper seemed like the most reliable source of information, and Sarah knew she needed to dig deeper. Maria was in the main hall, polishing a silver frame, when she saw Sarah approaching. She gave her a warm smile. "Is something troubling you, dear?" "Maria," Sarah began hesitantly, "do you know why Mr. Sterling, Richard's father, was so against my mother working here? What did he have against her specifically?" Maria looked surprised by the question and paused, thinking for a moment. "Ah, well, it was all very hush-hush at the time, but there were rumors, whispers amongst the staff." Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Rumors? What kind of rumors?" Maria hesitated again, glancing around the empty hall as if afraid of being overheard. "Well, some people said that Mr. Sterling, he was fond of Renee, very fond." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Fond? What do you mean, fond?" Maria lowered her voice even further. "They said they were having an affair, Mr. Sterling and your mother." Sarah felt like she'd been struck by lightning. An affair? Her mother? With Richard's father? It was almost too unbelievable to comprehend. But suddenly, everything clicked into place. The photograph in the library, Sophie's diary entries about her father's disapproval of Renee, Renee's sudden dismissal, Richard's evasiveness. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Later, when Richard returned from his meetings, he looked even more tired than usual, but Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to confront him. She found him in his office, as always, buried in paperwork. When he saw Sarah enter, he looked up, a weary smile touching his lips. "Everything all right, Sarah?" "Richard," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to know the truth, the whole truth, about my mother, about your father." Richard set his pen down, his smile fading, replaced by a guarded expression. "Sarah, I've told you everything I know. My father didn't approve of your mother's relationship with Sophie. He asked her to leave. End of story." "No, Richard, it's not the end of the story," Sarah said, stepping closer to his desk. "Maria told me about the rumors, about your father and my mother, about an affair." Richard's face went white. He stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. Then slowly, a deep flush of color crept up his neck. He didn't say anything for a long moment, his silence confirming Maria's whispered revelations. Finally, he let out a long, shuddering sigh and ran a hand over his face. "So, he said, his voice barely audible. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on his. "Yes, Richard, I know. Was it true? Were my mother and your father—" Richard averted his gaze, staring out the window at the city skyline. "Yes," he said, his voice low, heavy with shame. "It was true. My father, he and your mother, they were involved. It was a scandal, a secret my father kept buried for years." Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her mother, her sweet, hard-working mother, had been involved in a secret affair with this powerful, ruthless man, Richard's father. And that affair had destroyed both her mother's life and Sophie's. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked, her voice rising, trembling with anger and betrayal. "Why did you let me believe it was just about Sophie? Why did you lie to me?" Richard turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and pain. "I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah. I didn't want you to know this ugliness about your mother, about my father. I thought it was better to protect you from the truth." "Protect me?" Sarah repeated incredulously, her voice cracking. "You thought hiding this from me was protecting me? Don't you think I had the right to know the truth about my own mother?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you did. But I was ashamed, Sarah. Ashamed of my father. Ashamed of what he did to your mother, to Sophie. I didn't want you to think less of me, less of my family." "Think less of you?" Sarah said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Richard, your father destroyed my mother's life. He used her, then discarded her when it suited him. And you knew all of this, and you kept it from me. How could you?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb the full weight of her accusations. "I know, Sarah. I know I made a mistake. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I'm so sorry." Sarah stared at him, tears streaming down her face. It was too much to process, too much pain, too much betrayal. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Richard," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I need to be alone." She turned and fled from the office, leaving Richard standing there, alone with his guilt, his secrets, and the wreckage of his lies. In the days that followed, Sarah and Richard existed in a strained, painful silence within the penthouse. The revelation of her mother's affair with Richard's father had created a chasm between them, a gulf of unspoken pain and resentment. Sarah felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just by Richard's father, but by Richard himself, for keeping such a crucial part of her mother's story hidden. She spent most of her time in her suite with Ethan, trying to create a semblance of normalcy for him, reading him stories, playing games, shielding him from the heavy atmosphere that hung over the penthouse. But even Ethan sensed the change, the easy distance between Sarah and Richard. He became quieter, more withdrawn, his bright laughter less frequent. Richard, for his part, retreated into his work, burying himself in meetings, phone calls, and endless stacks of documents. When they did cross paths in the hallways or at the dinner table, their interactions were brief, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. The easy camaraderie, the hesitant connection that had begun to blossom between them had withered and died, poisoned by the secrets of the past. One evening, Sarah found herself drawn back to the library, the room that had become both a source of revelation and a reminder of the lies. She wandered through the towering shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of the old books, the familiar scent of leather and paper a bittersweet comfort. She stopped in front of the shelf where she had found Sophie's diary, and her gaze fell on a small, intricately carved wooden box she hadn't noticed before, tucked away behind a row of larger volumes. Curiosity piqued, Sarah carefully pulled out the box. It was heavy, the wood dark and polished with age. She lifted the lid, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a gold necklace, a delicate crescent moon pendant identical to the one worn by Sophie in the photograph. And beneath the necklace, a stack of letters bound together with a silk ribbon. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, Sophie's, but the words were addressed to her mother, Renee. "My dearest Renee," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I fear, my dear friend, that my father is to blame. I know about his feelings for you. I know about the threats he made. He is a cruel and ruthless man, Renee, and I fear he will stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. I am writing this to tell you the truth he desperately wants to hide. Renee, my father, he is not my biological father. He adopted me when I was a baby. My real father was your father, Renee. My father and your father were brothers. We are cousins, Renee. You and I, we are family." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Cousins? Sophie, her mother's closest friend, her confidant, was also her cousin, and Richard's father, Mr. Sterling, the man who had destroyed her mother's life, was not even Sophie's biological father. She frantically read through the rest of the letters, each one revealing more fragments of the hidden family history. Sophie described her growing suspicions about her parentage, her secret investigation into family records, and her eventual discovery of the truth. She wrote of her fear of her adoptive father, of his controlling nature, his possessiveness, and his growing obsession with Renee. One letter, dated just days before Sophie's death, was filled with a chilling premonition. "I fear my father knows I've discovered the truth. He's been watching me, his eyes colder than ever. He's threatened Renee, told her to leave, to disappear. He's capable of anything, Renee, anything to protect his secrets. If anything happens to me, please, Renee, promise me you will find the truth. Promise me you will expose him." Sarah's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the letters. Sophie's death. It hadn't been an accident. It had been murder. And Richard's father, he had killed his own adopted daughter to protect his secrets, to silence her, and to control Renee. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the full weight of the truth crashed down upon her. Her mother hadn't just been a victim of an affair. She had been a victim of a monstrous crime, a web of lies and deceit that had spanned decades and had cost Sophie her life. And Richard was the son of this monster, unknowingly carrying the burden of his father's sins. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and rage, Sarah knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. She had to confront Richard, to tell him everything, to expose the truth that had been buried for so long. She gathered the letters and the necklace, her heart pounding in her chest, and stormed out of the library, determined to finally break the silence that had haunted them for so long. Sarah found Richard in his office. The penthouse lights dimmed, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to a solitary figure. He looked up as she burst in, his expression weary, resigned. "Sarah, what is it?" She didn't speak, just thrust the letters and the necklace into his hands. Richard frowned, confused, then began to read. As he read, his face drained of color, his eyes widening in disbelief, then hardening with a dawning horror. He read each letter, each word, his hands trembling like her own. When he finally finished, he looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing pain. "This can't be true," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "It is true, Richard," Sarah said, her voice firm, despite the tears streaming down her face. "Sophie was murdered by your father to protect his secrets, to silence her, and to control my mother." Richard stared at her, his mind reeling, trying to process the unimaginable truth. His father, the man he had revered, the man he had tried to emulate, was a murderer. And Sophie, his beloved sister, had been killed by the very man who had raised them. I don't believe it," he said, shaking his head in denial. "My father, he couldn't." "Read the letters again, Richard," Sarah said, her voice laced with steel. "Read Sophie's words. She knew the truth, she feared him, and she was right to be afraid." Richard reread the letters, his eyes scanning the page, searching for any flaw, any hint of doubt. But the words were clear, undeniable, Sophie's voice echoing from beyond the grave, accusing his father of the ultimate betrayal. As the truth sank in, Richard's face crumpled, his carefully constructed facade of control finally breaking down. He let out a sob, a raw, guttural sound of anguish and despair. "My God," he whispered, his voice broken. "My God, what have I done? What has my family done?" Sarah watched him, her anger slowly giving way to a profound sense of pity. Richard was a victim too, trapped in a web of lies and deceit, unknowingly carrying the legacy of his father's monstrous crimes. She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his shoulder, her touch a fragile offering of comfort. "Richard," she said softly, "we have to do something. We have to expose the truth. For Sophie, for my mother, for ourselves." Richard looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed, filled with a newfound resolve. "You're right, Sarah," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "We have to. My father, he will not get away with this. Not anymore." In the days that followed, Sarah and Richard worked together, united by a shared purpose, a burning desire for justice. They pored over Sophie's letters, meticulously piecing together the fragments of the past, uncovering the depths of Richard's father's deceit and cruelty. Richard, fueled by a mixture of grief, anger, and guilt, used his considerable resources to launch a private investigation, determined to gather irrefutable evidence of his father's crimes. Sarah, armed with Sophie's letters and her own burning desire for justice for her mother, became an invaluable partner in the investigation. They worked tirelessly, interviewing former penthouse staff, poring over old documents, and digging into long-buried family secrets. As they worked side by side, a new kind of intimacy began to grow between them, forged in the crucible of shared pain and a common mission. The romantic spark that had flickered between them before the revelations remained dormant, but it was replaced by a deeper bond, a profound sense of understanding and mutual respect. They discovered a web of financial manipulations, hidden accounts, and carefully constructed alibis that pointed directly to Richard's father's involvement in Sophie's death. They uncovered evidence that he had not only orchestrated Sophie's murder, but had also systematically silenced anyone who threatened to expose his secrets, including Renee, forcing her to leave New York and disappear from their lives. Armed with this damning evidence, Richard and Sarah made the difficult decision to go to the authorities. Richard, knowing the immense power and influence of his family name, prepared himself for a brutal fight, bracing for the backlash and the potential devastation to his own reputation. But he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He owed it to Sophie, to Renee, and to Sarah to bring his father to justice, no matter the personal cost. Together, they walked into the precinct, hand in hand, ready to face the truth and to finally break free from the shadows of the past. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time they felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that they could finally reclaim their lives and build a future free from the lies and secrets that had haunted them for so long. They had found each other in the darkest of circumstances, and in their shared fight for justice, they discovered a bond that was stronger than blood, a love that had the power to heal, to forgive, and to ultimately set them free.